We saw in our first time together that one of the most popular ways to read Revelation is actually to create a theological system using Revelation. Much of the popular literature that you find about Revelation combines parts of that book with portions of other sections of the Scriptures in order to create a scenario of the future. We decided that a way to proceed, a different way, would be to read Revelation as a book with its own integrity, to take Revelation as a book from chapter 1 through chapter 22, and to see what Revelation would sound like if we actually looked at it as a whole. When we begin in chapter 1 with Revelation, we find right away in the first verse that Revelation identifies its author, that it was a message that was sent from God to a man named John. Now people wonder who was John, and we've actually got more speculation than we do hard evidence about who John was. Early Christian tradition had identified John as one of Jesus' 12 disciples, someone who had been called by Jesus, who'd followed him through his ministry in Galilee and in Jerusalem. Now what's interesting is when you read Revelation, John never claims to have been one of Jesus' original disciples, nor does John even claim to have seen Jesus during his ministry on earth. The only thing that John will tell us about himself is that he was a Christian, that he was on the island called Patmos off the coast of what today is Turkey. In ancient times it was Asia Minor, and that he was a Christian who was bearing witness to Jesus Christ. John never claims to be an apostle, never claims to have been with Jesus in Galilee or Jerusalem, and so I think we do well simply to stay with what Revelation actually gives us, the indication that it was written by a man named John, about whom we know very little else. Now when we get into the book of Revelation, just a few more verses, we'll find that one of the best kept secrets about Revelation is that Revelation is a letter. In chapter 1, verse 4, we read the words, John to the 7 churches that are in Asia. Now those same words recall the kinds of openings that you find in many of the other letters that are in the New Testament. At the beginning of Romans, Paul wrote to the church at Rome. At the beginning of 1 Corinthians, Paul wrote to the church at Corinth. In Philippians, Paul addresses his letter to the church at Philippi. John, in the book of Revelation, says John to the 7 churches that are in Asia. Recognizing that Revelation is a letter, I think is one of the best kept secrets about the book. People oftentimes put it off in a separate category, as if it's some strange and mysterious kind of literature that no one can possibly understand. But when you think about how you read letters, letters are a form of communication. They're designed to bring a message to people living in time and space. Paul wrote to Rome in order to be understood by them. John wrote to the 7 churches in Asia in order to be understood by them. Revelation is a form of communication. It's designed to bring a message that would actually have meaning for people in living, breathing congregations. People who wanted to know something about what God's will for them was. Now, with that in mind, we can read a little bit further and we'll find something about the setting in which this communication took place, in which John was trying to bring a message to these 7 congregations. In Revelation chapter 1, verse 9, John writes, I, John, your brother, who share with you in Jesus the persecution and the kingdom and the patient endurance, was on the island called Patmos, because of the word of God and the testimony of Jesus. I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day, and I heard behind me a loud voice like a trumpet saying, Write in a book what you see, and send it to the 7 churches. You'll note that after John gets this word, he's told which 7 churches the message was supposed to go to. In other words, he's told what to put on the outside of the envelope. He's told the postal route to make sure that there's no question about who's supposed to be reading this. The 7 churches listed there are Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea, a group of 7 congregations in 7 cities in Western Asia, what today is modern Turkey. Now, if we take John seriously, we'll take it seriously that he really does intend to communicate. Our task is not to take Revelation less seriously than those who speculate about the end times, but to take it more seriously, and to take it seriously when John says that he intends to communicate with people. Now, when you turn to Revelation chapter 2 and 3, you'll find that John will take us through a tour of these 7 churches. So that what we find in Revelation chapter 2 and 3 is really an opportunity to get to know some of these people. What was going on in their lives? What were the challenges that were facing them in their faith? Now, there are 7 churches, and each one has a somewhat different situation, but they do fall into several kinds of categories. When people do take Revelation's context seriously, they often assume that Revelation was a book that was written for Christians undergoing hardship or persecution. And that is true to a limited extent. You do find that there were Christians in these churches who were being persecuted for their faith. Smyrna is a good example. What's going on at Smyrna is a form of persecution in which Christians are apparently being denounced before the authorities who were in a position to put them into prison. If they were in prison, they also faced the possibility of potential death if they didn't renounce their faith. Now, this gives us a little bit of a glimpse into what was going on in a context. Christians were denounced for their faith because they really didn't fit in very well. They didn't worship the same gods and goddesses that everyone else did. There was plenty of religion in the ancient world. It wasn't a secular society. People could worship Zeus or Dionysus, Aphrodite or Artemis. There were plenty of gods and goddesses to go around, and Christians said, fine, but we don't worship any of them. We confess the one true God. Because they didn't worship as others worshipped, they were considered to be outsiders, strange. And so sometimes measures were taken to force them into conformity. And that was what was going on in the church at Smyrna, and to some extent at the church in Philadelphia. But there are still other congregations that had rather different kinds of problems. A second category of problems were assimilation. You find in the message to Pergamum, which follows in Revelation chapter 2, that the church at Pergamum was facing a situation in which some people were teaching that it was acceptable to eat meat sacrificed to idols. Now, that's a strange kind of issue for most of us living in the 21st century. Most of us don't worry about what it might mean to eat meat offered to idols. But for Christians back in John's time, that was a boundary issue. It was an issue that had to do with how much does your faith set you apart from other people in your society. People might eat meat offered to idols at any number of different occasions. Probably the easiest to imagine is an occasion in which there is a public festival, a celebration. The whole town would turn out, much as they do during celebrations that we have in our cities today. There would be a civic celebration in which you would get the leaders of the town who would come out. There would be a parade. It would all end up with a great sacrifice in the center of town and a free distribution of meat to everyone who came. People wanted to participate. Citizens of Pergamum would want to turn out, to be part of it, because everybody was doing it. Everybody was there. To be a citizen of the town was to participate in the worship of Zeus. But could Christians really do that without compromising their faith? It was a boundary issue, made Christians uncomfortable. The issue of how much does your faith set you apart was a problem for Christians in Pergamum, in Thyatira, as well as in Ephesus. The final category is one of complacency. Toward the end of chapter 3, you find the church at Laodicea. And there the risen Christ says to them that they see themselves as rich, prosperous, they need nothing. They're called lukewarm because they're so comfortable that there's no edge, no vitality left in their faith. For them, the problem is not that life is so bad. The problem for them is that life is too good, too easy. And because they were so comfortable, they were falling asleep in their faith. There was no edge, no vitality left. There are several different kinds of problems then. Revelation isn't written for just one kind of reader. It's written for Christians who are feeling afflicted in their faith. It's written for Christians who are trying to keep their faith under wraps, not let it show, not interfere with their social life. And it's written for people who are just so comfortable that there's no vitality left in their faith. If Revelation can address a group of Christians that diverse in its own time, I'm convinced that it can continue to address Christians as diverse as those of us who are living today. Now, as we make our way forward, we'll find that when John takes us into chapter 4, the question is not so much, where are you coming from? Are you coming from a situation in which you're comfortable or afflicted or somewhere in between? Because what John is interested in is not where you're coming from, but where are you coming to? In chapter 4, we find a vivid description of God seated on the throne, surrounded by a host of elders and a group of creatures who are engaged in heavenly praise. They sing out, "Holy, holy, holy, Lord God Almighty," and in so doing invite those of us who are reading the book to join with them in heavenly praise. The vision of God seated on the throne in Revelation chapter 4 is where Revelation wants to draw us to. Out of our situations, whether we're comfortable or complacent, whether we're afflicted or just trying to get along. It tries to catch us up in that same vision of praise and celebration. Many of our hymn writers have set these things to music. Hymns like Holy, Holy, Holy are precisely musical renditions of Revelation 4. As we proceed, some questions to think about. Where do you see some of the churches like those in Revelation 2 and 3 today? Where do you see Christians being persecuted for their faith? Where might you see Christians who are just trying to blend in, not let their faith interfere with their social life? Where might you see Christians who are simply so comfortable, so affluent, that there's no vitality left in their faith? As you think about where you see Christians like that, think about where you see yourself. And then in light of Revelation chapter 4 and that vision of the heavenly throne room, ask yourself, where might God be calling you today?